Painter Erin uses gesture and abstraction to create visual impact.
I love a strong visual impact. I love taking all the context and the narrative away. I love the isolation of the figure in space, very similar to the negative space around a sculpture, the empty stage around a dancer. I love how evocative the human form can be in that isolation. When I started kind of reevaluating the role of fashion and clothing in my work, I started being really interested in the idea that I could treat clothing just like any other abstract element I'm using, so it could just be purely form and color and line, and I could just utilize it that way. And what would happen was kind of interesting because I was trying to stay focused as an artist on what I was seeing, and then sometimes it would switch gears and I would be evaluating it as a woman in today's society and starting to look at like, oh hey, that's a great dress, I'd like to have that dress, and I have to shift gears back to the artist and think like, oh wait, let's look at those shapes and forms again. And I start looking at the model's pose and gesture and their figure, and then I start thinking, darn, I wish I was that thin or something, and comparing myself. It was interesting to notice that I would get pulled that direction, because as I'm painting the female figure, I don't really think of it as painting a woman. I'm just thinking that's the human form. I happen to do female imagery because I think I just relate to it more, and because I started from a place of self-portraiture. The way I've used clothing on the figure has really evolved. I did a series of paintings of my husband, and I was kind of going for an everyman aesthetic, so I put him in just a plain white dress shirt. And I really loved what happened about keeping it timeless, keeping it unobtrusive, so the focus was not on the clothing. And then later on, when I got a female model, I started putting her in the white dress shirt because I just enjoyed what was happening there. I was really happy with the exploration of the forms, and it was working for me. And then after doing a large series like that, an interesting thing started to happen where I was getting feedback from people seeing the work, asking me what my big fascination was with androgyny, with gender roles, why I was putting the female in male clothing. And it was really eye-opening because I hadn't thought of that at all. I get so focused on the pure abstract content, and I was just really enjoying what the clothing did, by keeping it minimal, just fabric folds, just shapes with which I could compose. When I got that feedback, I kind of decided to reevaluate what I was doing with the clothing, and I realized I'd been a little bit unnecessarily afraid of, I didn't want to capture a specific fashion, and I wanted to keep the focus on the figure, on the gesture, on the pose. The first thing I wanted to do was convert it to something more feminine, a more feminine aesthetic, because I hadn't ever meant to be so far away from that. I was focusing on the female figure and not thinking about what the clothing did to that. But by adding that element with the clothing, it actually gave me a lot more to work with abstractly, which is what I'm always so interested in. The subject is purely realistic, but it's within a framework of pure design. So I consider the composition, I consider that kind of as fundamental more than the subject. Like, I'm not worried about portraiture. Portraiture doesn't interest me, the idea of capturing a particular psychology at work in that person. I want to use the human form as the element I'm designing with. We read body language, we look at pose and gesture, and we ascribe meaning and sense a story in that pose, in what we're seeing there. So I'm trying to keep things very undefined and open because the human figure automatically emotes. There's nothing you have to do to create that. I like anything that flattens the realism. I like to take something that looks totally realistic and you look closer and you say, wait a minute, the background's coming into the figure, how can that be? Or there's something overlapping and it doesn't meet up, what's happening there? One thing I really like to achieve is a sense of harmony and balance where every part, every little abstract element, every compositional piece is coming together in such a way that it actually enhances every other part of it. And when that happens, it creates a certain harmony that I like, but I also like with the figure and with the placement and with these visual glitches to create an element of tension and awkwardness too that you look for. It's how we view reality too. I mean, you can think things are really stable and you trust what you're seeing with your eyes, and then something comes up that makes you question it. Or emotionally, you think you've got it all figured out and something comes along and it turns it on its side. I'm thinking of it the way Degas said, the artist does not draw what he sees, but what he must make others see. I think I'm very interested in the composition and the pure form and distilling the realism just as a way to heighten its expressive power. There's a notion in the art world these days that, painting is dead, realism is dead, beauty is dead, and I think those are all ridiculous thoughts. Those things have been around since the beginning of art forms, and I think they'll always be around. And one thing I'm specifically doing is showing people that there is something contemporary and fresh to say in those realms. You don't have to go far from that, and you can still say something meaningful. For me, the painting process is just extremely intuitive, and I'm thinking so much about how to get the vision in my head onto the canvas that I'm not leaving any time to think about a big meaning behind it or symbolism or anything like that. As an artist, I think my job is to create something so visually striking that people will stop and look at it and they'll think about it. I think it needs to be something that grabs, and it is operating on a purely visual level. I think that the best thing an artist can do is not be concerned what other artists have done or what other artists are doing. Just stay open to what's motivating them and get their vision out there, because if you don't get it out there, it'll never exist.